They said she snapped. But no, she waited. Waited through grief. Waited through betrayal. Waited through the sound of her daughter calling another woman Mom. And when she came home, the same key she'd used for 16 years didn't fit the lock. Zayla Johnson had lost her mother, her marriage, and her mind, not all at once, but piece by piece, starting with a voice in her head that whispered, "They're lying to you." 3 months later, the woman she once called her best friend was pregnant. Her husband was smiling again. Her daughter barely looked her in the eye. But no one asked what happened in that house before the screaming started. No one asked what her daughter wrote in that letter. And no one expected what Zayla would do with the truth. The front door was wide open when the officers arrived. No one had called them directly, but a neighbor across the street had heard the screams, sharp, frantic, guttural, and then silence. That kind of silence that doesn't sit right. When the officers stepped inside, they weren't met with panic or resistance. They were met with blood. It was smeared across the kitchen floor like someone had tried to wipe it up, then gave up. A chair was overturned in the dining room. One shoe rested on the third step of the staircase. The kind of chaos that didn't come from a struggle, but something much colder. Something that had purpose. They found the woman first, Taya Ellis, on her back, curled slightly to the side, breathing in short, shallow gasps. Her right eye was already swelling shut. Blood pulsed from her nose. There were scratches along her jaw, and bruises forming across her collarbone. It was clear she'd been beaten badly, but nothing about the scene suggested a fight. There were no defensive wounds on her hands, no broken nails, just damage. In the hallway, by the front coat closet, was Zayla Johnson. No panic, no explanation. Just a stillness that unsettled even the most seasoned responder. Her hands were bruised, one of them slightly swollen, and her shirt had what looked like dried tears around the neckline. She didn't ask if Taya was okay. She didn't ask for her daughter. She simply looked down at her own hands like they weren't hers at all. "I'm not running," she said once, and then she didn't speak again. Neighbors stood on their lawns as Zayla was led to the squad car. A few recognized her. She was the quiet one. The woman who usually kept to herself, waved politely, but never lingered in conversation. Married, with a teenage daughter, no prior issues, no known history of violence. But that Saturday, she walked out of her own front door in cuffs, head lowered, eyes locked on something no one else could see. The paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Taya, who drifted in and out of consciousness. Her injuries were extensive, but not life-threatening. It was the look in her eyes, the disoriented panic as she tried to form words, that left a mark. She kept repeating the same name. Not Zayla's. Roman's. Inside the holding cell that night, Zayla didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for food. She asked one question. Did my daughter see it? And when the officer told her no, that Sanya hadn't been home during the incident, Zayla just nodded and leaned her head back against the wall like she'd been holding her breath since morning. At the hospital, Taya's statement was fragmented. She said Zayla came in through the garage, unannounced, quiet, like she knew no one was expecting her. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just lunged. Taya said she'd never seen that look in her friend's eyes before, like she wasn't even looking at a person anymore, just a problem that needed to be erased. The next morning, photos of the injuries were documented. The charges were filed. The paperwork was drafted. But the motive remained absent. No forced entry, no verbal threats, no warning, just impact. And behind every unanswered question sat one silent figure. Zayla Johnson, calm as ever, as if she already knew what the rest of them would take weeks to figure out. Before the bruises, before the courtroom, there was a phone call. It came in the middle of Zayla's shift at the nursing home. Her hands were still gloved, holding a tray of medication when she answered. No one needed to say much. The nurse on the other end barely whispered the words. It was peaceful. She was asleep. But it didn't matter how they said it. Her mother was gone. Just like that. That woman had been the last pillar Zayla leaned on. Her father had died before she turned 15. Her older brother hadn't spoken to the family in years. But her mother, Annette, was constant. A sharp-tongued, God-fearing woman who raised Zayla with discipline and devotion. Losing her wasn't just emotional. It was cellular. Like something inside Zayla caved in and never rebuilt. In the weeks that followed, the shift was subtle. She didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She functioned. She bathed patients, returned calls, attended the funeral, even sent thank-you notes to the neighbors who brought food. But something behind her eyes dulled. It was as if grief had rerouted her wiring. Roman noticed it first, but not with concern, at least not the kind that comes with compassion. He mentioned it over dinner one night, in passing, said she looked tired, asked if she needed a break from work. But it didn't sound like care. It sounded like inconvenience, like her sadness was something to be managed, not understood. She told him she was fine, but even she didn't believe it. And when she looked at his face, she saw it. He didn't believe it either. He just stopped asking. It wasn't long before the distance settled in. Roman began working later than usual, claiming back-to-back meetings, group therapy sessions, and last-minute weekend seminars. At first, Zayla accepted it. She even encouraged it, thinking maybe the space would help her breathe. But the silence that came with that space wasn't healing. It was haunting. And then there was Sanya, 15, moody, and always a little attached to her father. That was never a problem before. But after the funeral, it felt like Sanya was deliberately choosing sides in a war Zayla didn't even realize had started. She would leave the house without saying goodbye, spend hours at her best friend's, avoid eye contact when her mother spoke. Zayla blamed it on teenage hormones at first, but then came the subtle stings. Why are you always so angry? Maybe if you smiled more, Dad wouldn't avoid you. And the one that kept echoing in her chest, it's not fun being around someone who always looks dead. That one she remembered word for word. The house felt colder. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. It was like grief had moved in and started changing the locks. Conversations turned into nods. Dinners turned into leftovers. Even the bed felt bigger than it used to. Zayla tried. She cooked Roman's favorite meals. She bought Sanya the sneakers she'd been eyeing. She tried to be present at school functions even when her knees felt like they'd give out. But nothing landed. It was like loving people who'd already made peace with her absence. Roman stopped wearing his ring 2 months after the funeral. She saw it on the kitchen counter one morning and never asked why. Maybe because she already knew. Sania stopped saying goodnight. Lydia offered her couch more than once, and in the hollow that her mother's death left behind, something darker had begun to settle. Not rage, not madness, just a quiet ache that no one cared enough to name. Taya Ellis was just that friend who always showed up. She and Zayla had known each other since they were 17, met at a summer camp, and somehow stuck through the mess of adulthood. They weren't blood, but close enough for people to assume they were cousins. Vacations, baby showers, girls' nights, birthdays. Taya was in the photos. So when she started showing up more often after Zayla's mother passed, No one thought much of it. If anything, people praised it. Roman echoed that same sentiment when Zayla questioned it once. He said Taya was helping take some pressure off her, giving her space to grieve. And at first, it felt like that was true. Taya brought food. She picked up Sania from school when Zayla couldn't. She came over late some nights just to sit on the porch with Zayla and let her cry. There were days when Taya answered the door, answered the phone, handled appointments, like she lived there. At the time, it didn't seem like overstepping. It felt like support. But something in Zayla's chest never fully settled. She started staying the night more often. At first it was once or twice a week. Then it became nearly every other day. Roman never questioned it. In fact, he seemed relieved. He joked once that Taya should be paying rent. Zayla smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sania adored her. They laughed over the same shows, shared playlists, exchanged beauty tips. Zayla would walk into the living room and hear them giggling about things she wasn't part of. Sometimes it felt like Taya had found a version of motherhood she could enjoy without the weight. And Sania, starved for connection after weeks of silence from her real mother, soaked it in without question. Taya was there for Roman's birthday dinner. She was in the front row at Sania's school performance. She was the one people thanked when they received party invites or updates from the family. Zayla watched it all. Her home slowly reshaped around someone who was never supposed to stay. It was supposed to be a full-day outing. Lydia, a co-worker, had invited Zayla to a wellness workshop out in Decatur. Meditation, journaling, something light. But after an hour, Zayla wasn't feeling it. The noise of everyone's healing started to feel like a lie. She told Lydia she needed air and slipped out quietly. She didn't call ahead. She didn't text. She just drove home. She pulled into the driveway around 2:47 p.m. The sun still high, her heart already unsettled. Something about the way the curtains were half drawn. Something about the front door, slightly ajar. She paused for a second in the car, then got out. She went through the garage. Old habit. The door opened like always. Nothing about the house looked different at first. Music was playing softly from the kitchen speaker. Someone was laughing upstairs. She set her purse on the entry bench and called out, "Roman?" No answer. She climbed the stairs slowly, unsure why her hands had begun to sweat. The closer she got to the bedroom, the clearer the sounds became. Not music, not laughter. Rhythmic movement. A voice, faint, breathless, familiar. She pushed the bedroom door open without knocking. It only took 2 seconds to see it all. Roman, Taya, half-dressed, on their bed. Her mind didn't process it all at once. Her eyes went to the red nail polish scratching down Roman's back. Then to the gold necklace swinging from Taya's neck, the one Zayla had given her for her birthday 3 years ago. Roman's shirt was on the floor. The bed sheets were twisted. The betrayal wasn't new. It was lived in. They froze. Zayla didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She stood there, jaw locked, chest rising and falling like something caged inside was tearing its way out. Taya scrambled to cover herself, trying to speak, but her mouth wasn't fast enough. Roman sat up, chest heaving, lips parting like he wanted to offer an excuse. But no excuse could rewrite what was burned into Zayla's eyes. She didn't remember walking across the room. She didn't remember grabbing Taya by the hair. All she remembers is the sting in her hands, the weight of her body as she pinned her down, the sound of Roman shouting, pulling, dragging her off, the taste of salt and heat in her mouth as she screamed a name that wasn't hers anymore. It lasted barely a minute, but the damage was done. Taya's face was a canvas of swelling and blood. The courtroom wasn't packed. It wasn't that kind of case. No press, no community outrage. Just a row of silent seats, worn-down benches, and the quiet hum of a broken fan overhead. But for Zayla Johnson, that room might as well have been a stadium. Every face in it carried a weight, and every word said inside it would shape who she'd be allowed to be from that point on. The charges were clear: aggravated battery and assault. The photos of Taya's injuries were submitted without ceremony. Bruises across her face, a gash on her temple, swelling along her jawline. No one denied the violence, not even Zayla. The courtroom wasn't there to debate what happened. It was there to decide why. The prosecution wasted no time constructing their version of her. Not Zayla, the mother. Not Zayla, the widow of grief. But Zayla, the unhinged. The emotionally unstable. The woman who spiraled after the death of her mother and began projecting her pain onto the people around her. The word paranoid came up 3 times in opening arguments. So did irrational. So did volatile. Then came the testimonies. Roman Johnson took the stand first. He wore a tailored suit. His voice didn't waver. He told the court that Zayla had been distant since her mother passed, that she had trouble sleeping, that she accused people of things that weren't happening. He didn't elaborate on what those things were. He kept his answers clean, emotionless, like he'd rehearsed them. When asked directly if he and Taya had been involved before the attack, he shook his head. Not at that time. We were close, but never inappropriate. It was a lie, but the kind of lie that sits well in court. The kind that doesn't raise eyebrows when wrapped in a man's calm tone. Taya Ellis entered next. Her wounds had healed, but the tension in her posture hadn't. She wore long sleeves and minimal makeup. She called Zayla her sister, then described her as jealous, possessive, and unwell. She told the jury she had only ever tried to help, said she stayed over often to support Zayla through her grief, and that the attack came out of nowhere. A burst of rage. She never mentioned the necklace, never mentioned the robe, never mentioned the bed. And then came Sania. She sat with her shoulders pulled in, like the courtroom air weighed double. She was just a child on the outside, but her words hit harder than anything said before. "My mom hasn't been okay for a long time," she said. She didn't cry. She didn't fumble. Zayla never took the stand. Her lawyer advised against it, said the jury had already made up their minds. Instead, she sat quietly through every word, blinking slower with each blow. The judge called the act concerning, but not beyond redemption. She was sentenced to 3 to 6 months, with eligibility for early release based on behavior and program participation. She didn't cry. She didn't look at Roman, or Taya, or her daughter. She just stood when her name was called, signed the papers, and walked through the doors that would hold her for the next 90 days. Outside that courtroom, no one knew the full story. Inside it, no one cared to ask. And somewhere in a sealed envelope at a processing facility, a letter was already on its way to the jail, written in a teenage girl's handwriting, laced with guilt. The first week inside the jail passed in silence. Zayla kept her head down, answered when spoken to, followed the routine without resistance. She wasn't combative. She wasn't even visibly angry. She just moved like someone whose body was present, but whose mind was somewhere else entirely. The other women left her alone. Some of them recognized the look in her eyes. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't confusion. It was betrayal, the kind that settles in your bones. She didn't ask for visitors, didn't ask for updates. The outside world had made its judgment. Roman was probably sleeping peacefully. Taya had likely resumed her place on the couch. And Sanya. Zayla didn't even know what to think when it came to her daughter. She replayed her courtroom testimony a dozen times in her head. The words didn't just sting, they left bruises where no one could see. Then the envelope arrived. It came on a Thursday. A correctional officer slid it under her cell door during mail call. Plain white, her name written in soft, careful cursive. The return address matched her home, her old home. She didn't recognize the handwriting at first. It was cleaner, more controlled than she remembered. But when she flipped it open and saw the first line, her hands trembled. "Mom, I don't even know how to start this." It was from Sanya. The letter was long, pages folded neatly. Words poured out in a rhythm that was anything but practiced. She apologized first, not for testifying, but for not telling the truth. She said she was scared, confused, that everything happened too fast, and no one gave her time to think, that her father told her what to say, that Taya practiced the story with her before court. Zayla sat on her bunk, each word unraveling her breath. Then came the confession. Taya had moved in just a few days after the arrest. Not as a guest, but as a replacement. She slept in Zayla's bed, wore her robe, took over her closet, told Sania she was there to hold the family together. Roman told Sania to respect Taya's authority in the house. When she refused to follow orders, Taya slapped her. Once, then again, a week later. When Sanya told her father, he told her not to make things worse, that her mother was already gone, and this house doesn't need any more trouble. There was more. Roman had cleaned out their joint savings account. Sanya overheard him on the phone with the bank, told them Zayla was incarcerated and he needed full control to keep things moving. He sold Zayla's car, put the title in Taya's name. He even had plans to take over the small inheritance Zayla had received after her mother's death, money she hadn't even touched. And then came the final blow. Taya was pregnant. Sanya had seen the test herself. She found it in the bathroom trash. She confronted her father, and he didn't deny it. He told her she should be happy, that they were starting over, that it was time to move forward from the chaos. Zayla read that last paragraph over and over again. Not because she didn't understand it, but because some part of her refused to accept that it was real. That while she sat in a cell for defending her own dignity, the two people who tore her life apart were building a new one in her place. And somewhere in the stillness of that cold cell, something started taking shape. Not revenge, not even rage, just clarity. The metal gate buzzed open at exactly 7:42 a.m. Zayla didn't flinch. She walked out the same way she walked in. No suitcase, no smile, no goodbyes. Just a folded letter in her coat pocket and calloused silence behind her eyes. Jail didn't fix her. It didn't reform her. It just gave her 90 days to sit in her own wreckage, while the world outside moved on without her. She didn't go to her house. Not yet. Instead, she headed to a modest brick duplex on the east side, just past Redan Road. The home of Dwayne Johnson, Roman's father, and the only person she once believed had enough clarity to see through all of it. Dwayne had always been stern but fair, a pastor deeply rooted in his church, the kind of man who gave measured advice and expected respect in return. Zayla had known him for nearly 2 decades. He was there at her wedding, held Sanya when she was born, and prayed with her the night her mother passed. If anyone would understand what had really happened, it would be him. He opened the door slowly, surprised, but not alarmed to see her. "Didn't expect you so soon," he said, stepping aside. He didn't offer a hug. She sat in his living room, hands folded tightly in her lap, words stacking in her throat. She didn't start with small talk. She didn't ask how he was. She went straight to the letter. "I need you to hear me out," she said. And for the next few minutes, Zayla told him everything. About the inheritance Roman took. About Taya moving in within days. About the bruises Sania endured. About the pregnancy. Every detail from Sania's letter, laid bare, one line at a time. Her voice never cracked. Her eyes never watered. She didn't need sympathy. She needed someone to believe her. Dwayne listened, quietly, nodding here and there, but giving nothing away. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose, and said, "I don't think you're lying, Zayla. But I don't think you're seeing things clearly." She blinked. "I talk to Roman every week," he continued. "That boy's been steady. Hurt, but steady. Taya's been there for him. For Sania, too. She's done more in 3 months for that household than I saw you do in the last 3 years." Zayla stared at him. "I'm not saying you deserved what happened. I'm saying maybe you weren't well, and maybe they were just trying to hold the pieces together." That broke something in her that hadn't cracked in court. It wasn't just that he didn't believe her. It was that he did, and still found a way to justify it. Like Roman's actions were survival. Like Taya's place in her home was earned. Like the bruises, the theft, the lies, all of it, were unfortunate, but understandable. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She stood up slowly, thanked him for his time, and walked to the door. He called after her. "Zayla, don't go doing something you can't take back." She didn't answer. She walked out of that house more alone than she'd ever been. Not because she was unloved, but because everyone who claimed to love her had decided she was easier to erase than defend. And that's when she knew. There was no going back. It started with a knock on a door. Lydia Harris lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop in South DeKalb. Quiet place. No visitors. She stood outside the door for 5 minutes before she had the courage to knock. When Lydia opened it, she didn't speak, just looked at Zayla, scanned her face like she was searching for something behind her eyes, and stepped aside to let her in. Over the next few days, Zayla didn't speak about Roman or Taya. She didn't tell Lydia what the letter said. Lydia had always known how to read silence. And the silence coming off Zayla now wasn't grief. It wasn't pain. It was direction. She didn't talk about revenge. She didn't shout about justice. But in the early mornings, before the sun broke over the highway, Zayla sat with a borrowed tablet, scrolling, checking addresses, looking at traffic patterns, school routes, grocery runs. Over the following week, she mapped out everything. Not with rage, but with eerie calm. She walked past her old neighborhood at night, watched the lights turn off room by room. She timed how long it took Roman to leave for work, noted how long Taya stayed gone after grocery trips. She stood across from the school parking lot and watched Sanya walk out alone, earbuds in, backpack sliding off one shoulder. She didn't approach. She didn't wave. The house hadn't changed. Same beige siding, same chipped mailbox, same porch chair leaning slightly to the left like it always had. But for Zayla Johnson, walking up those front steps wasn't a return. It was a reckoning. She'd timed it carefully. Grocery day. Roman would be home early, prepping dinner like he always did when Taya didn't feel like cooking. Sania would be upstairs, homework, phone, earbuds in. The same rhythm, week after week, just now with new people playing her old roles. She entered through the garage. She still remembered the code. Roman hadn't changed it. Inside, the smell hit first. Garlic, butter, roasted chicken. For a second, her body betrayed her. The scent sparked something warm, familiar. Then it passed. Roman was in the dining area, plating food. One hand gripped a fork. The other held his phone, laughing softly at something on the screen. He didn't hear her footsteps. Not at first. When he turned, it was already too late. Zayla raised the gun. One shot, straight to the chest. No hesitation, no second glance. He collapsed sideways, chair scraping hard against the floor. The plate shattered. The fork spun. From the living room, a scream. Taya stood up too fast, disoriented by the sound, eyes widening when she saw Zayla step into view. Her voice caught in her throat. A half-formed name, a cry, a plea. It never landed. Zayla didn't fire again. She dropped the gun on the hallway table and pulled the knife from her coat pocket. Taya tried to run. She tripped over the rug and hit the floor near the fireplace. Zayla walked calmly, grabbed her by the collar of her dress, and brought the knife down. Once. Twice. Then again. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. Her breathing stayed steady. It was clinical, like a job that needed finishing. By the time it was over, Taya's body had gone still. The white of her blouse soaked deep red. The TV in the background was still playing. A commercial for a cruise line. Laughter and waves. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Sania stood at the railing. Frozen. Zayla looked up at her. The knife was still in her hand, now slick. She let it fall to the rug. "I need you to do something," Zayla said, her voice calm. "Call 911. Sania didn't move. Zayla walked to the foot of the stairs. She didn't go up. She just waited. Looked at her daughter like it was the first time in years she was really seeing her. She walked to the front door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the quiet. No neighbors outside, no cars passing, just the sound of her own footsteps. She didn't run. She didn't look back. Inside, Sanya picked up the phone with shaking fingers. Her voice cracked when she spoke, but the words were clear. "There's been a shooting. My mom, my dad, I think. Please come quick." It took them 3 days to find her. By the time detectives arrived, Zayla was sitting at Lydia's kitchen table, back straight, hands folded. The same quiet presence from her first arrest. No panic, no resistance. She didn't run. She didn't ask why they were there. She just stood up, turned around, and placed her hands behind her back before they even spoke. Back at the precinct, Zayla didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't demand an explanation. When they read her rights, she listened without blinking. She sat down in the interview room, one metal table, 2 plastic chairs, white walls that echoed even the smallest sounds, and waited. The lead detective started slowly, laying out the scene as they understood it. The entry point, the timing, the trajectory of the bullet, the wounds on Taya's chest. Then he pushed a folder across the table. Inside were photos, overhead shots of the dining room, the living room, the blood trail, the recovered knife, the open letter from Sanya. Zayla didn't flinch. Zayla leaned back in the chair. "They didn't just betray me. They replaced me. In my house. In my daughter's life. They made me feel like I'd imagined everything. Like I was broken." She paused. "I wasn't broken." She told them about the letter, the bruises, the money, the pregnancy. She gave them names, dates, memories that had been buried under months of silence. Not as a justification, but as a map, leading back to the moment she realized grief hadn't made her crazy. It had made her invisible. The detectives didn't interrupt. They didn't argue. They let her speak. Over the next several days, investigators began piecing together the full story. They tracked the financial records, joint accounts closed, titles transferred, transactions flagged. They found photos from Taya's social media confirming the timeline Zayla described. Her face beaming, belly round, captioned with love and new beginnings. They spoke to neighbors who had assumed she and Roman were married. No one questioned it. No one asked what happened to the wife who used to live there. They found bruises documented at Sania's school clinic. 2 reports filed just weeks apart. Never followed up. Never questioned. When Lydia was questioned, she didn't deny helping Zayla. But she made one thing clear. I never asked what she was planning, but I knew she wasn't coming back the same. In the end, it didn't matter how clean the files were. The story had already begun to write itself, not in court documents, but in the emotional divide it left behind. Because for some, Zayla Johnson was a murderer. But for others, she was something far more dangerous. A woman who had lost everything, and then decided to take something back. The trial lasted 6 days. Not long. Most of the facts were already on the table. The crime scene, the ballistics, the confession. But this time, Zayla Johnson spoke. She took the stand in a pressed beige jumpsuit, posture straight, hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She told the court what she'd already told investigators, but this time, she told it like it belonged to her. She described what it felt like to watch herself be replaced, piece by piece. How grief made her quiet, and how silence made her invisible. She told them about the letter from her daughter, the bruises, the stolen money, the baby that wasn't meant to be born into someone else's lie. The defense leaned into emotional collapse, said the system had failed a woman grieving both her mother and her identity. The prosecution pushed back, calling it revenge, calculated, premeditated. They reminded the jury of Roman's position in the community, his career, the trust people had placed in him. They painted Taya as misguided, not malicious, a woman caught in someone else's spiral. But there were cracks even in that narrative. A subpoenaed OBGYN revealed that Taya's due date didn't align with Roman's timeline. DNA testing confirmed what Sania had overheard but never spoken aloud. The baby wasn't Roman's. Another name surfaced in that revelation. One that never made it into the official story, but it followed the case like a shadow. A co-worker of Taya's. Married. 2 kids. Known for being friendly. A detail buried deep, but not deep enough to disappear. Roman's legacy, once polished, began to unravel. Not publicly, not loudly, but among those who had once praised his steady hands and calm demeanor. Questions rose quietly in the spaces where his truth had once stood firm. What kind of man replaces a grieving wife with a best friend? What kind of father silences his daughter to protect an image? Zayla didn't answer those questions. She didn't have to. When the verdict was read, she didn't flinch. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence, 25 years. Eligible for parole after 15. Sania came to see her 3 weeks later. She wasn't the same girl who had testified in court months earlier. She walked in taller, slower, a little more cautious.